Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, August 11th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-0 in the preseason, for whatever that's worth, after a 31-25 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars on Saturday night. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to break down some of the biggest winners and losers from the preseason opener, share my thoughts from my trip to Latrobe last Wednesday, and give you a couple roster predictions. It's pretty early in the preseason, but I want to look at some of the guys who could be making the 53-man roster when the Steelers finally break camp and get ready for their week 1 matchup against the Jets. But first, we'll hit on a new addition to the expanded training camp roster who we got to see on Saturday night. The Steelers' most recent signing, offensive lineman Andrus Peat. On Thursday, this signing came through. Pete is a 31-year-old offensive lineman, left guard, left tackle. In his 10th season, he played 21 snaps on Saturday night, all at left tackle. And this move is seemingly in response to the Calvin Anderson injury that he suffered on the Friday night lights practice, which I believe, if I have my dates right, was August 1st. Anderson was not playing on Saturday night, was not healthy, not playing on Saturday night. And he is the primary swing tackle depth. Behind Anderson is Dylan Cook. And now it's Andrus Peat. Pete last year played 57 snaps for the Raiders with 1 start in week 2. 34 of those snaps came at left guard, 11 at left tackle, 12 as an eligible tackle, 6th offensive lineman out there for the Raiders. The Steelers need a more permanent answer at swing tackle, and this is a swing at that. So I'm good with the signing. I still think the Steelers are going to need to keep their eyes peeled for the waiver wire and everything once camp cut down finally happens, and see if there's another swing tackle. There probably won't be, because offensive tackle is one of the most difficult positions, or most scarcely talented positions in the NFL. There are not a lot of those guys out there, hence Dan Moore's contract this offseason, hence the contract that the Chiefs gave to Jalen Moore, the 49ers backup, to try to get into the rotation for them in Kansas City. It's just not a position that you're going to find a ton of depth at. And the Steelers have added a body who has in the past been a Pro Bowler, has had a really good run in New Orleans, playing left guard and left tackle. He did both. So adding some depth, some versatility, and a guy who they were willing to give 21 snaps at left tackle on a few days' notice. Mike Tomlin likes high pedigree guys. Andrus Peat is the son of a former NFL offensive guard, and he is a former Pro Bowler who had a really nice run in New Orleans. So this is exactly the type of guy that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers like to bring in, or are willing to trust. I wouldn't be surprised to see him make the roster, even, jumping on the moving train like he is. I would expect Andrus Peat to potentially be in the mix, barring a return to health from Calvin Anderson. We don't really know the situation there just yet. But I would expect Pete to probably be making the 53-man roster. We'll have to see how that battle plays out, but he's probably likely to get the nod over a guy like Dylan Cook, and Cook you can just slide onto the practice squad, presumably. So that's the news. Now to backtrack even further to last Wednesday. That signing was on last Thursday. Last Wednesday, when you got to listen to a show from Shane, I was out at Steelers training camp at St. Vincent College in Latrobe. It was not a padded practice. It was an Aaron Rodgers media availability. It was an interesting day out at Latrobe, and a lot of fun to get to cover that and ask some questions of some guys. And one of the questions, and now to be able to share some of those observations with you, one of the questions that I asked was to Pat Freiermuth about, how are you feeling about this offense that's going to have so many different tight ends and versatility in that room, and he's excited about it, as are the rest of the Steelers tight ends. They should be, because they're going to be on the field a lot. That's my number one observation from training camp. I'm not the first person to say this, but this is going to be a very tight end heavy offense. It's not going to be a situation where Pat Freiermuth is the one and Johnny gets rotated every once in a while, and your tight end 3, Darnell Washington, really isn't out there a lot. I think all three of those guys are going to be out there a ton and on the field together a lot very early in their live sessions. The Steelers ran out an empty formation with 3 tight ends and a running back, all split out wide. This team does not have a lot of wide receivers that it feels very good about, but it does have a super talented tight end room, and I'm very interested to see what they can do with that, especially considering the varied skill sets. I've talked about this. I talked about it when the Steelers made the trade and got Jonnu Smith, but I think it's further crystallizing that they have a guy in Jonnu who is a quick hitter, slants, screens, yards after the catch tight end who's really difficult to tackle and was a Pro Bowler last year. They have a guy in Pat Freiermuth who is a solid possession receiver, but he also has some verticality to his game, running, seams and crossers and things like that. And I think they're going to use him in that role. They're going to get the ball out quickly to Jonnu and let him be the yards after the catch guy. And then Darnell Washington is going to be that extra offensive tackle in pass protection and in the run game, and then have some mobility, as some versatility as a pass catcher as well. We saw him catch a touchdown from Mason Rudolph on Saturday night. I think Darnell Washington, every time you see him in person, it's just remarkable to see him run at that size. He's bigger than Broderick Jones and multiple Steelers offensive linemen. He just flat out is. But he runs really smooth routes. He has smooth hands, natural pass catcher, catches the ball away from his body like you want, strong hands. He is just a freak of nature, and that's been the case since he was at Georgia and since the Steelers drafted him. But I feel like he's getting more and more comfortable, and he's going to have a role that's really fitting of that skill set. So I think the Steelers can dictate a lot to defenses. And it's been a while since the Steelers have been able to dictate anything on the offensive side of the ball. They can't necessarily do it because of overwhelming talent like they did when they had, the Killer Bees and Ben and Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, and you were just the defense was a little bit at your mercy. It's not necessarily going to be like that, but because they're so unique in their usage of those tight ends, a position that is coming back into vogue in the NFL. Not that it ever went away, but multi-tight end personnel, 12 personnel is on the rise across the NFL because it allows you to force the defense's hand. Do they put their big bodies out there? Okay, now you can throw. If they stay light, you can run right at them. And the Steelers can really do that and have not just the 13 personnel where they have the 3 tight ends, which I think they'll certainly lead the league in, but in the 12 personnel, you have so many different versions of it, right? Like you can have Darnell Washington out there essentially as an extra offensive lineman and Jonnu Smith out there as a slot receiver. Both those guys really comfortable in those roles. And that's so different than having Jonnu and Freiermuth, attacking different areas of the field. Defenses are really going to have to respond with their personnel based on which of those tight ends are on the field. And 12 personnel is not the same every time with the Steelers because of those 3 guys. And it's going to be interesting to see how Arthur Smith deploys it. He's not somebody who I would call the most creative offensive coordinator in the NFL. He had a ton of success, right? Like he revived Ryan Tannehill's career and really busted things open with Derrick Henry, who was already great, but brought that offense to a new level in Tennessee, and then had varied success with not very good quarterbacks in Atlanta. He's pretty rigid in his principles. He wants to do the outside zone stuff. He favors his players like Cordero Patterson, right? He can be stubborn in those ways. I don't think of him as necessarily an innovator or somebody who's hyper creative. He's going to have to be to get the most out of this offense. And I actually, from what I saw, I believe he is being pretty creative and pretty innovative with those tight ends. So that's my number one takeaway from training camp. Some other thoughts. The narrative going in to my trip last Wednesday, this has maybe changed some, right? It moves really quickly. But what I felt and was hearing was that Aaron Rodgers and Roman Wilson are just not on the same page, right? These two guys haven't figured it out yet. Roman Wilson is somebody who might be, not on the roster bubble necessarily, but losing reps to Scotty Miller and sinking down the depth chart after he was a third round pick and had to really redshirt his rookie year. Those two looked good on Wednesday when I was there. They looked comfortable. They looked in rhythm. Aaron Rodgers hit Roman Wilson on a deep out route, and it was just perfectly timed right out of the break. And Wilson looked comfortable, looked confident, and I think that's the player that we saw on Saturday night as well. I won't go too far ahead with that because he might show up later in the winners and losers categories. You can guess which one. But I was impressed with Roman Wilson. He looked comfortable. He looked like an NFL wide receiver. He did a lot of extra work beforehand on the jugs machine, and in those drills and individual work didn't necessarily look the most comfortable or like an imposing threat. Didn't seem to have the best hands, but he's a football player, and that's what he was at Michigan. He looked comfortable during those live reps, and he looked comfortable on Saturday night. The last observation that I'll take away, I mean, that camp I was at is a little bit in the rearview mirror now, so I won't belabor it too much. Aaron Rodgers wasn't particularly impressive. Again, it was an unpadded practice, but I didn't see the ball coming out of his hands looking terribly different than it did out of Mason Rudolph's and Skylar Thompson's. And I throw Skylar Thompson's name in there because if I just say, then it did coming out of Mason Rudolph's hands, the Mason Rudolph stands in Pittsburgh are going to just say, well, that's because he could be a future Hall of Famer too. No, that's not the case. And Rodgers just didn't blow me away. I'm reserving judgment until we get to the season. Again, it was an unpadded practice, but I do have concerns that if Aaron Rodgers is limited in terms of his mobility, which he was last year because of the injury and could be this year because of the injury and because he's 41 years old, I think that just really zaps him of his superpower. That practice ended in the 2-minute drill when Rodgers threw an interception over the middle to Juan Thornhill. He just didn't really look Thornhill off. And even afterwards, when we were talking, we being the media, were talking to Thornhill, he was surprised that Rodgers threw the ball, right? He just said, watched his eyes, and I was surprised that he threw it. It came right to Thornhill, and he picked it off and ended the drill. Thornhill has been impressive in camp and whatnot, but he's not an all-pro caliber safety. If anyone's the weak link on this defense, it's probably Juan Thornhill. And he was able to just pretty easily jump that and was surprised that Rodgers even made that throw. Rodgers has never necessarily been the Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, dissect you from the pocket, quick throws, and just be one step ahead in the chess game type of quarterback. And I think a lot of that was revealed last year with the Jets. He has been, relying on his physical gifts and his mobility and his ability to throw off platform and with poor footwork and be accurate with those throws. If that's gone, either because he can't make those throws anymore or because he just can't get outside of the pocket and create in second reaction, I just don't know what he's going to look like as a quarterback in this particular offense. And it could be really similar to Ben because Ben was the same way, that his superpower was his ability to create late and downs and, never go down because he's the size of a defensive end. Once that was gone, he was good at, sitting in the shotgun and picking apart defenses, but he wasn't great at it. He wasn't good enough at it to make the Steelers a long-term viable offense in 2020 and 2021. They were figured out pretty quickly because of his limitations. And I do have concerns about that with Rodgers coming off of what I saw on Wednesday at training camp. Obviously, we didn't see Rodgers on Saturday night in the first preseason game for the Steelers. He didn't play. Mason Rudolph got the start, and Skylar Thompson took it the rest of the way. Now is a good time to get into my preseason week 1 winners and losers. We're going to start with the winners, but before we do, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Still Curtain podcast, please like and subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. We really appreciate your support. Now to the preseason week 1 winners. And we got to start with Roman Wilson. I just talked about him at practice, what I saw from him. He had 2 catches on 2 targets for 24 yards. Half his snaps came from the slot. Half his snaps came from outside. The first play of the game, Arthur Smith drew it up for a play action crosser to Wilson over the middle, and Rudolph hit him. He looked comfortable. He looked confident. He was able to separate over the middle of the field. He played more physical than his size, like he did at Michigan. Just scouting him and watching his tape coming out of Michigan, he was not a player that dominated with any physical gifts. He's a fast receiver. He's a quick receiver. He's not overly fast or quick. He's not overly physical. He's relatively undersized. That's why there's concerns that he's a pure slot. And I do think he probably is. But he just had a knack for getting open, for sitting down in the right spots against zone coverage, and for winning at the top of routes against man, knowing the right depth to run his routes, just savvy, a really savvy wide receiver. And that's what I think we saw on Saturday night, where he looked comfortable and confident. And I think the biggest reason that he's a winner from that game is because he just played 10 snaps and got treated like he's already a proven commodity. And we know that's not the case with Roman Wilson. He played 5 snaps all of last season. He had the ankle injury in camp that kept him out, and then he had multiple injuries after that when he tried to come back. Just never got onto the field. And yet, after drawing up the first target for him, getting him a couple touches early, he was done. 10 snaps and he was done for the day. He was treated like a veteran. And that's a really good sign. That means that this team believes he doesn't need a ton of work, right? He's not in the Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, even Jalen Warren territory of, we know what you are. You don't need any work in the preseason, or maybe just one preseason game. But he is in the category of, other starters, that even Darnell Washington, who has a carved out, defined role in this offense, is going to get a little bit of work early and then can take the rest of the day off. Just 10 snaps for Roman Wilson was really encouraging. And I think it means that Robert Woods might not make this team. Bobby Trees was once one of the better receivers in the NFL and pretty prolific with Sean McVay and Jared Goff back in 2017 when that offense was lighting the world on fire. I just don't think it's there anymore. And I don't think the Steelers think it's there anymore. He doesn't seem overly impressive. Yes, he played 24 snaps on Saturday night. That's a lot for somebody who has as much experience as he does. He's more valuable than a lot of the Steelers' other receivers, particularly Wilson and Scotty Miller, as a blocker. And 9 of those 24 snaps were run blocking snaps. I can see why Arthur Smith would want to have him out there. You want to have the most capable blockers and people in other positions to get a look at your running backs and get a look at your quarterbacks. And so you want a functioning ecosystem, and Robert Woods is the type of player that can give you that. But so is Ben Skoranek, and he played 4 snaps, right? He's pretty comfortably on this team because of his contributions on special teams, because of what he brings as a blocker in the passing game, or as a blocker in the run game from wide receiver. I feel like Skoranek is pretty comfortably on this team, and Robert Woods might be one of the odd men out at wide receiver. Brandon Johnson played 25 snaps. Scotty Miller played 9, right? Scotty Miller got treated like somebody who has a more defined role in this offense than Robert Woods. So I think Roman Wilson is a winner. I don't have him officially on the list because I want to talk about some other people further down the roster, or, maybe just less name recognition than Robert Woods. But Robert Woods comes out of that game as a loser in my mind, because not because of anything about his performance, but because of the way other wide receivers were treated by the coaching staff and the respect that they got in preseason week number 1. Number 2 on my list of winners, cornerback Brandon Echols. Just a depth addition in free agency this offseason that didn't seem to be a huge splash, especially compared to the Darius Slay signing and the Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey trade. But I think Brandon Echols, the way he looked at camp, he looked really strong. He ripped Scotty Miller's been one of the camp darlings, if you can call him that, a veteran. But Brandon Echols ripped an interception away from him on Wednesday when I was there, and just kind of manhandled him at the catch point. And it was impressive. He was very solid last night in his somewhat extended work, and there are great reports coming out about his performance at training camp. I can verify those from the one day I was there. He looks to have the edge on Corey Trice and James Pierre as the backup outside corner, right? Because 4 spots, 4 corners are pretty locked in. Ramsey's obviously going to be on the team. Darius Slay is obviously going to be on the team. Joey Porter Jr. going to be on the team. Beanie Bishop, after what he did last year, is kind of a ball hawking nickel. I don't love his game. I don't think he's going to even be a Mike Hilton caliber nickel. They're very different players, but just as, that archetype of undrafted free agent who plays the slot. But I think he's going to be on the team, certainly. And then I think it's probably Brandon Echols. James Pierre has some utility in special teams, and maybe that'll get him on the team as a 6th corner if the Steelers decide to keep 6. But if it's just 5, I think Echols is the 5th. I think Pierre is potentially an odd man out, and I think it's looking pretty rough for Corey Trice Jr., who is a talented player that the Steelers were able to get late on day 3 of Omar Khan's first draft because of injury concerns. And now he missed his entire rookie year. Last year he played some. He's hurt again. Dealt with injuries again. I think there's a good chance that Trice, because he's not somebody who can kick inside to the slot, he's not somebody who's shown a ton of utility on special teams. I think there's a good chance he's the odd man out. Pierre potentially as well. And there are some other interesting options at corner that I want to talk about a little later, who maybe could be vying for a spot because they have some other roles that they can fill. And it just depends on what the Steelers are looking for at that position. But Corey Trice Jr., I think, is looking like he's on the chopping block after preseason week 1 and after everything Brandon Echols has done so far this preseason. Winner number 3, Skylar Thompson. I'm putting him here because I want to have a conversation about it. I wasn't necessarily blown away by anything that he did. I don't think he made too many particularly impressive throws, right? Like the 26-yard touchdown when he was under pressure and got lit up that closed the game out in the 4th quarter. Somewhat impressive throw, but also you're just kind of putting it up there, right? And your receiver goes and makes a play. I wasn't blown away by that. I think he wasn't particularly precise throwing over the middle of the field. He did a good job with one of those 3 touchdowns. He finished 20 for 28 for 233 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a red zone fumble that the Steelers recovered. I think that is definitely a mark against him. Nearly had a sneak up on me, but I think I kept it at bay. Had that fumble, Steelers were able to recover it, but, that's nearly a red zone turnover, and it's just a matter of which way the ball bounces. That's still a knock against you. I just wasn't one of those touchdowns was on a screenplay. I just wasn't blown away by anything that he did, but the numbers look really good. And one thing that he did really well, it's vanilla defenses, the looks in the secondary you're getting. You can't overreact to preseason because the looks that you're getting in the secondary are super basic, especially on the back of a blitz. But when he was blitzed, he looked like a veteran who he started an NFL playoff game and had the Bills on the ropes a couple years ago with Miami. So he's going to be comfortable in a preseason opener. And he torched the blitz to the tune of 8 for 9 for 105 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, one of those was on a screen, but his mobility helps get to that screen. And particularly on that one, he made it a much cleaner play because he was able to kind of flush to his right before dumping it off. Um, I I think he's certainly a capable backup quarterback. And so it's a conversation about him and Will Howard. Will Howard obviously broke his hand last Tuesday, the day before, or broke a finger, I believe. I believe it's his pinky finger. Um, on his throwing hand the day before I showed up in training camp, which was great fun because we didn't get to hear from Will Howard and we didn't get to see him on the field either. But it's gonna be a competition there for QB3 and not even much of a competition, but just a decision for Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin who they want to keep. I think you can make a pretty clear argument that Skylar Thompson is the better quarterback right now, more capable of running a competent NFL offense. He's done it for Mike McDaniel in the past. And yes, a lot of that is hyper schemed up stuff on a team with a lot of really fast skill players that can make things happen with the ball in their hands on screens and short passes and rely heavily on play action and motion. The Steelers can do that too. Everyone has to do that when they have a backup quarterback in there. I'm not making an argument for him being, a top 32 quarterback in the NFL, just a top 64 maybe. And to be QB3, maybe he's even number 70. I'm not sure Will Howard is in that top 70 yet. He just won a national championship. Yes, he did it throwing to Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. Egbuka was just a first round pick. Jeremiah Smith will be. Carnell Tate, their wide receiver 3, will be. Travion Henderson and Quinton Judkins were both second rounders. That offense was completely loaded. And he just kind of had to play point guard, and he did a really nice job of it, especially in the college football playoff. But I've never been impressed by him as a thrower. I don't think he's particularly comfortable under pressure. I think his best utility at the college level was as a runner, and the option he gives you to use the 11-man run game, especially late in games. Ohio State closed out a lot of games with his legs, but I don't think he has that same physicality and speed advantage at the next level. In fact, I know he won't. So that's not really going to be part of his game. He's going to have to win from the pocket much more. And I just don't think he's precise enough and accurate enough to ever really do that. But it's just the way that NFL teams make decisions. They're going to side with even a sixth round pick. They're going to swing on that upside. So if Howard doesn't have to be on IR or something entering the season, I think he'll probably be QB3 just regardless because you want to see what you have with him as a developmental project. I think that's probably the right decision because, again, I wasn't just blown away by Skylar Thompson, but for him to make a case to make this roster or another one somewhere in the league, he has to do well with the opportunities he's given. 20 for 28 for 233 and 3 is doing well with it. There were just a couple things like multiple passes that were just batted down and he just couldn't get enough touch on them. And the one rolling left off play action, he had 2 crossers in similar areas, and I think he picked the underneath one and it got batted down. Just a little late making that decision, just wasn't able to layer that ball over the defender. That's the stuff that's not even one of the most difficult throws. I mean, rolling to your left, it is, but you're working with a half field read, you're working with a receiver running open because of that play action. Um, that's the stuff you have to be able to hit on, and I didn't see enough of it from Thompson to be like, okay, definitely he has to be QB3, but I think he's probably better than Will Howard is right now or would have been if he were healthy. So he's making his case. He's definitely a winner. And if he's not on the Steelers roster, I think he'll end up on a roster somewhere else. I have a couple of honorable mentions, just fun guys that are maybe going to make a case for practice squad if they weren't already in line for that heading into training camp. I don't think there's any room in the backfield. Mike Tomlin seems to love Kenneth Gainwell, and even back to his availability before the first practice in pads, he said the matchup he was most excited for was backs on backers, Peyton Wilson versus Kenneth Gainwell, because he's that impressed with what Gainwell does as a pass catcher, and he's a proven veteran in that role. I don't know that I see him being that valuable of a piece of this roster, but as a kick returner, he's certainly going to be in the mix there. I think Gainwell is locked into a roster spot because of the comments Tomlin has made and just a veteran head coach going with a veteran player. He's more likely to trust him, and that's fine. But Lou Nichols, the second year man out of Central Michigan, he just ran really hard. And I think he got downhill in the outside zone system and was decisive with his cuts when he found a hole and ran dudes over. And that's what you have to do as a physical runner in this system, right? Najee Harris was more plodding and more indecisive and just got tripped up in the backfield too many times because his vision wasn't that level for this type of scheme. I think Lou Nichols as a bigger back, maybe not quite as big as Najee, he looked a lot faster because he was more decisive. He also looked a lot faster because most of his carries came in the fourth quarter of a preseason game, and you're just going to look faster than those athletes. But I was impressed with Nichols. I would be happy for him to make the practice squad and would be intrigued by him getting some more carries in the next preseason game, at least more carries than Evan Hull and Trey Sermon, because I've never been impressed by Trey Sermon, even when he was I think he was a third round pick of the 49ers a few years ago. I was never blown away by him at Ohio State. Still just don't feel very impressed by what he's able to do. And Evan Hull doesn't do much for me either. I want to see more of Lou Nichols in the next two preseason games and see if he can make a case for the practice squad, or even if there's an injury or something, cracking the 53-man roster. Another one, Deshaun Jameson, a defensive guy, but the shiftiest guy at camp. In one-on-ones, he's just so tough to tackle in space. That's why he was used as a returner and was impressive as a returner. He averaged nearly 30 yards on 3 returns on Saturday night. He played 15 games for Carolina in 2023, but spent last year on the Steelers practice squad. He has utility because he can be a punt returner and because he can be a kick returner. And he's one of the guys I was talking about in the secondary because he's a cornerback, but he's primarily a nickel. He played almost all of his snaps in the slot on Saturday night, all of his defensive snaps. And it's just a matter of if the Steelers see it as Jalen Ramsey goes to the slot, Beanie Bishop is your backup nickel. You don't have to carry another nickel. Or if they view Ramsey as an outside guy, you have Slay, Porter, and Ramsey primarily as outside guys. Beanie Bishop's your nickel, and then you need a backup nickel. I don't think that's how they're going to view it. It seems like Ramsey's going to be, when they're in their nickel, he's going to be in the slot. And that will make it tough for Jameson, but I've just been impressed by him. I was impressed by him at camp, and he looked the part, at least as a returner, and he, was able to fly around defensively and make a couple of plays. So I was impressed by him. Keyshawn Williams is another one, caught the 26-yard touchdown pass from Skylar Thompson, just kind of went up and got it. He's been fairly impressive in camp. Another person to keep an eye on, but he's not going to make a roster spot. Just worth mentioning because I thought he was impressive. And Max Hurleman, same situation. He was a defensive back in Notre Dame and a running back, and he showed up in Pittsburgh as a running back. That's why he's number 34. But he's used as a wide receiver, and I think he's actually pretty good at it. He was impressive at camp as well, and just somebody that was eliciting sideline conversations between media members about what position did he play at Notre Dame and what's this guy's story. He's a super athletic guy, but I don't think there's going to be any room for him on the roster, but I'd be happy to see him make the practice squad. He caught a touchdown as well on Saturday night. Now to the losers. We're flipping it around. We're going to get negative. I'll talk about more consequential players with my second two, who are maybe more interesting, but just somebody who had to jump out as a loser, Kyler McMichael, man. Whew. Not a good one. He was a long shot to make the roster, is not really in the mix, and in my opinion, shouldn't be in the mix for the practice squad. He missed 2 tackles badly in the second half and struggled in coverage. There's going to be an opportunity for multiple corners to make the practice squad. But I would say McMichael is well behind Jameson, Cameron McCutcheon, and even Daryl Porter Jr., who was a late add to the training camp roster. So if you're looking for way down the roster stuff and how those things stack up and practice squad spots, I think McMichael was definitely a loser. He struggled a lot out at cornerback. And now we'll breeze through that to the more consequential names, the names you're a little more familiar with. DeMarvin Leal. I think he was a big loser because of how he played and because of how the players he's competing with, 4 snaps, 4 roster spots, played as well. Really with what the Steelers have at outside linebacker, and they've moved Leal from defensive end to outside linebacker. That move happened last year. He was better in that role, especially as a run-fitting outside linebacker, oversized. But with Watt, Highsmith, Herbig, and Jack Sawyer, there really isn't much room there unless you're going to carry 5 outside linebackers, and the Steelers don't typically do that. It's usually 4, especially when you have TJ Watt as one of the 4. He's going to eat up quite a few snaps. Jack Sawyer pretty much got a full run. Both Leal and Sawyer played 32 snaps. How did they fare? Jack Sawyer had 4 quarterback pressures, a 20% pass rush win rate. Take that for what it's worth, but it's just, one-on-one with your offensive tackle. Are you winning in under 2.5 seconds? He did at a 20% clip. 3 of those 4 QB pressures came in true pass sets where it's, third down and long, and just situations where it's going to be a true drop back pass, no play action involved. And he won on those plays at a 37% clip when there's no trickery. The offensive line it's just one-on-one essentially. And you can pin your ears back and get to the quarterback. Sawyer did it at a really nice rate, 37% win rate there. That's excellent. Anything around 20 for overall pass rush win rate is, tops of the NFL. He's not going to be there against starting NFL caliber tackles, but I think he proved that he can get after the quarterback and just has been impressive in camp and was impressive on Saturday night. Also, the Steelers defensive linemen and the veterans, Cam Hayward, call him 5-star because he was, one of the number 1 recruits in the country when he was going to Ohio State years ago. And I just think that's really funny that players like that who just won a national championship and 5-star lived up to all of that. And you're still just kind of getting ribbed at training camp because you're now the low man on the totem pole. I just thought that was very funny, and he seemed to handle it well and take it really well. Leal on the flip side, 1 QB pressure, a 0% win rate, pass rush win rate, and 0 tackles. Sawyer had 2 tackles. Sawyer also had a 20% pass rush win rate, and Leal 0%. So how did he get a QB pressure? Just a free run and miscommunication. Not like he's beating an offensive tackle. Not getting around the edge. He doesn't have much bend. He's too big for that. He doesn't have enough power doesn't have the ability to convert speed to power as a pass rusher. He's a run-fitting outside linebacker on a team that has one of the best run-defending outside linebackers in all of football in TJ Watt and another really good young one in Jack Sawyer. I just don't see any way he makes the 53-man roster. If he was going to, he needed to be really impressive in training camp, and he was not on Saturday night. So he's a big loser from the Steelers' first preseason game. And then another one on the defensive line, Logan Lee, a 2024 sixth round pick out of Iowa, who was an interesting project as a 3 technique, interior defensive lineman, maybe, developmental guy that can pop. Well, he lost his first year to injury, spent the season on IR, and he played 5 snaps on Saturday night. And Y.A. Black, the Steelers' 6th round pick this year, who is 6'6", 330 pounds, and the Steelers like him at 3 technique, not nose, which I think is interesting and confusing. But they like him a lot. He's been really impressive in camp. He's been swatting a lot of passes, as you should if you're 6'6" defensive lineman. He's locked into a roster spot. It seems like they're pretty high on him. And he was more impressive than Logan. I mean, obviously Logan Lee played only 5 snaps, but Y.A. Black has been impressive throughout camp, is climbing up the depth chart, is going to be on this roster. And Logan Lee's probably going to end up being an odd man out. Loudermilk is likely to have a spot at defensive end. Daniel Ekwale played most of the nose tackle snaps on Saturday night. And there aren't a ton of nose tackle snaps in the modern NFL, but it's going to be Keanu Benton and Ekwale taking them for the Steelers. And so it's a matter of how many defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen that Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan want to keep when they break camp. But I would be pretty surprised if Logan Lee makes the 53-man roster. And, talking about guys like Corey Trice and Logan Lee and Ryan Watts had to retire because of injury. But Dante Kent, even this year, a 7th round pick, who was looking good early in camp, but is dealing with injuries and now is unlikely to make the roster. A fair amount of late round Omar Khan draft selections that aren't really panning out pretty quickly. I don't know that that's a reason for setting off any alarm bells. You got to hit the early ones. Those are the ones that are most important. And the jury's still out on those as well. Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu, who we haven't seen a ton from. But I think generally the Steelers feel good about Khan's drafting. There's just some late round picks that are not really going to find a spot on this roster. And some of that is because of guys that Khan's finding in free agency and other things. So again, not a reason to be overly concerned about the general manager or anything about this roster construction. Just an interesting thing that a couple of day 3 draft picks are maybe not going to have a spot, and even a former 3rd round pick into Marvin Leal, not a Khan selection, Kevin Colbert selection in his final year of his rookie deal, but a couple guys who have some draft capital invested in them who may not be making the 53-man roster. That's it for winners and losers for me. I have a couple interesting battles to just keep an eye on and kind of take stock of before I get going and wrap up the show. Inside linebacker, obviously it's going to be Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson. Malik Harrison is there. He's a veteran. And it's probably Mark Robinson over Carson Bruner. It seemed like when the Steelers drafted Carson Bruner, son of Mark Bruner, Steelers scout, that he was going to be a shoo-in to be a, backup linebacker and an important special teams guy. Cole Holcomb in the mix at linebacker as well. And who knows what's going to happen with Holcomb coming off of the injury that caused him to miss all of last year. Maybe he returns to form. Maybe he doesn't. There's still a lot up in the air at linebacker, but it seems like Mark Robinson, who's somebody who I feel like Steelers fans continue to count out, and he just keeps finding a way onto the roster. I was impressed with Robinson early in his career. I just wanted to see more of him because he flies around. I think he's really fast. I think he hits hard. He has the right mentality to be kind of a downhill thumping um, linebacker. Is the rest of it going to come along? Maybe it's starting to, but that could be bad news for Bruner, another Omar Khan pick who may not be making the roster. Again, a seventh rounder, so not overly concerned. And at defensive back, Dante Kent, who I just mentioned, and Corey Trice are both losing ground. Kent will be a practice squad guy, I would imagine. Corey Trice, not so sure. But Deshaun Jameson looking good at nickel and Cameron McCutcheon impressing outside. The Steelers have a lot of other options than those former late round picks. So those are spots to keep an eye on, I would say. And then obviously, as I mentioned early on, the swing tackle spot, Dylan Cook, Calvin Anderson, Andrus Peat. Who's it going to be? They're going to keep two of those guys, certainly. Maybe they find a way to keep all three because Pete can play left guard and has done it through most of his career. But those are a couple interesting battles to watch. And, young guys who were garnering some intrigue on day 3 of the draft who may not have a spot on the 53-man roster when the Steelers finally break camp. That'll do it for me today. We had a football game to watch, and it was a football game. It had a 70-yard field goal in it. That was cool. But preseason football doesn't really get the juices flowing all the way, but I'm excited to talk about some of those down the roster battles and building out this 53-man roster. We're getting closer to cut down. We still got 2 preseason games left, and I will be back next Monday to react to preseason game number 2. Until then, have a good one. And as always, go Steelers.